We continue our coverage on the expulsion of Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool from the US. For more reaction on this, we now speak to the leader of Build One South Africa with Mmusi Maimane. Its leader, Mmusi Maimane. Mmusi, this is a continuation in what seems like a downward spiral in the relations between Washington and Pretoria. The expulsion comes not as a surprise, but it comes as an unfortunate spanner in the wheels, so to speak, in a work-in-progress endeavor towards strengthening relationships, or at least restoring relationships between the White House and the Union buildings. What is your assessment, not just as the leader of Build One South Africa political party, but also someone that's engaged on the multilateral diplomatic political bodies, at least with the various leaders in your past that you've engaged with, heads of states. What is your assessment of what the strategy ought to be going next?
Well, good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. I certainly think that our multilateral US-South Africa relations have been, broadly speaking, poorly managed. Our strategy in terms of engaging the US has not been effective. We've sort of taken an ambiguous stance. At one level, we tell South Africans we'll look to the east and looking at China. At another level, we talk about BRICS. But most crucially, no one really thinks that it would be wise for South Africa to simply be dismissive of the US. And therefore, this particular instance speaks of a lack of clarity about what our purpose and our multilateral relations are with the US. Because, again, you have to answer the question, on whose behalf was Ambassador Rasool speaking? So I certainly think what needs to urgently happen is that we need to be clear and deliberate about what our strategy is. Our strategy with the US pertains to trade, and it must be limited to that. Because ultimately, what then follows on from that is an engagement between trade missions here in South Africa and those in the US. We can't treat the US as though it will always be led by President Trump. We need to recognize its long-term goal. And as our third largest trading partner, we need to ensure that those industries continue. And then ultimately, in the light of that, I would hope that later on in the year, it could culminate with a state visit by President Ramaphosa, which would give us an opportunity to be able to seal, if you like, a particular trade deal with an understanding of the fact that some of the issues that have been raised, that have been ventilated as South Africa hands its chairmanship of BRICS, of the G20 over, that ultimately it must require that the long-term sustainability of the US-South Africa trade. So I just certainly think at this stage in time, we are almost reactionaries rather than people who are proactively looking to say, what are the interests of South Africa, where are the trade relations, and who do we need to, we should have had a team now already in the US, rather than this, everyone who has a line to Washington can go.
Yeah, but importantly here, if you say that our relationship with the US ought to stick to trade, what you're essentially saying is that it must be stripped down to its bare skeleton and rebuilt from the bottom up. What we're fighting for, at least right now, is hopefully to hold on to a preferential trade relationship, which is what we have and what we risk to lose going forward. Is the risk worth it? And do you think that if it were to be, in your version and modality, to be stripped down to its bare skeleton and built back up from the bottom, do you think we could build back to, in the future of the US, to a trade relation that has preferential trade prescripts for South Africa?
At its principal cost, this is 100,000 jobs. At least that's what is projected on AGOA. And that's notwithstanding our relations as we speak about PEPFAR, as it speaks to the US and aid around our HIV intervention. And I certainly think our direction on that particular issue, we must now come back to Africa and say, can we set up a fund collectively that deals with HIV? Because HIV isn't a virus that is only located in South Africa. It requires multiple countries, particularly in SADC, to deal together. But coming back to the US and trade, I certainly believe that it can be rebuilt. It is beneficial for both countries. We certainly have a set of minerals and have a continent upon which our export relations with the US become important. And certainly I think that what we then furthermore needs to do is send an ambassador to South Africa who will expand that mandate. Rather than delving into the politics of the issue, I don't necessarily think we're going to resolve those in the short term. We need to really bunker down on what minerals we send to the US, what preferential trade we can achieve, and ultimately, in our G20 chairmanship, how do we represent the continent at large to ensure that at least our bilaterals there are beneficial to the 1.2 billion Africans that will be coming by 2040.
Mmusi Maimane, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Do you perhaps have any advice on an ailing soccer team like Kaizer Chiefs on how they can turn their fortunes around? You've supported them lifelong.
And we'll keep doing despite the pain we are going through. Perhaps let's pass the budget and see if we can appropriate some money for some decent players.
Yeah, I certainly hope your politics is not as bad as your taste in soccer teams, Mmusi. Thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it.